A year after the introduction of the super popular Redmi Note 9 series of phones, Xiaomi has unveiled to the public their successor, the Redmi Note 10 series. I will emphasize the Pro model because it seems to me that the Redmi Note Pro series is perhaps the best-selling model from this manufacturer, a phone that traditionally offers an incredible value at a fair, modest price. We tested the Redmi Note 6 Pro in December of 2018, 7 Pro in March 2019, 8 Pro in December 2019, 9 Pro in May of 2020, and finally, the Redmi Note 10 Pro in April 2021. So 4 successful models were released in just 18 months, and now 11 months later, which is the longest period between the 2 generations so far, we get to see the new 10 series. Right now, Xiaomi is making some really great value phones across different price ranges, and no one can deny that. Today, we will take a look at the best model in the Redmi Note 10 line, the Pro model. The star features of this mid-range phones are the luxurious 6.67-inch AMOLED screen that refreshes at 120Hz, the 108-megapixel main camera, and the €305 price point for the 128GB version or the €290 for the 64GB variant. Besides the actual phone, the package contains a 33-watt fast charger, a silicone case, and a USB-A to USB-C cable for charging and connecting to the PC. We mentioned this because a good portion of new generation phones comes with a USB-C to USB-C cable, and then a problem arises when you want to transfer something to a computer or a laptop that does not have a new USB-C connector. The plastic frame of this phone may not sound solid, but it certainly is. In combination with well-arranged elements inside the housing, it enables good structural strength of this model. The slightly curved back is covered in glass, as is the screen, and both have a Gorilla Glass 5 protective coating against scratches and cracks. All the elements are fitted really well, and you can't really tell whether it's a metal or a plastic frame. Even a weight of 193 grams will not give it away. The silicone case has a plug over the USB-C port as an additional protection, and the phone is IP53 certified, which means resistance to water spillage and rain to a lesser extent. This screen, which has usual dimensions for Xiaomi, has never been seen before in this price range due to the high price. With the excellent brightness of 450 nits that goes up to the peak of 1200 nits, the 120Hz refresh rate, HDR10 support, and thin frames, it is clear that the Redmi Note 10 Pro competes with models in a higher price class than the one it belongs to. The screen resolution is 240 x 1080 pixels or 395 pixels per inch, and its edges are slightly curved to make a so-called 2.5D screen. The front camera is the only element that disturbs this beautiful screen and is made in a punch hole format, centrally aligned on the top and not too large. Xiaomi also puts a foil on the screen right out of the factory, which provides additional protection against scratches, which is always a welcome addition. We should also mention that the proximity sensor does its job very well, so during phone calls we did not accidentally turn on a screen, as was the case with the Mi 10T and 10T Pro models. Now, when it comes to the refresh rate, the high 120Hz option is not set when you turn on the phone for the first time, but you have to activate it manually. It is a so-called dynamic refresh system, but unlike on more expensive phones, it does not change the refresh in fine steps, so it's either 60Hz or 120Hz. The good thing is that the touch digitizer operates at 240Hz, which means instant touch detection, which is important and useful in fast-paced mobile games. Static images and standby will lower the refresh rate to 60Hz, as well as YouTube and Netflix playback, while only a small number of games will set the FPS above 60Hz. We're talking about titles like Shadowgun Legends, Rayman Adventures, Final Fantasy XV Pocket Edition, Skullgirls, Marvel Contest of Champions, and a few others. On the bottom edge of the phone, there is a USB-C 2.0 port, microphone, and a speaker, while on the top, there is another microphone and a speaker pair, so the phone comes with a stereo sound, a 3.5mm audio jack, and the always welcome infrared transceiver. On the left, there is a slot for 2 SIM cards and a separate micro SD that always comes in handy with phones where you can only choose between 64 and 128GB of storage memory. On the opposite side, we have the power button, also fingerprint sensor, and the integrated volume control button. I didn't like the fact that the power button or fingerprint sensor doesn't have a usual recess in which the thumb would fit nicely, but follows the contour of the phone's frame. On top of that, the button is almost flush with the frame, so you will sometimes have trouble finding it with your finger. Fortunately, it is in a good place, so with the standard grip of the phone, the thumb usually rests in the right place. The good thing is that the sensor is very precise, and only once in a dozen times would it halt or fail to recognize the fingerprint. Another thing we liked was the ability to choose between a constant active sensor and pressure activation, so you don't accidentally unlock the phone while taking it out of your pocket. The back of the phone is visually dominated by the camera body, and it's kind of impressive how Xiaomi, which currently has more than 50 current phones on the market, always manages to do something new with the design. This time, the camera system has two elements, one that houses a flash and autofocus system, and another one with 4 cameras, with the main camera highlighted by a large gray frame and is becoming for a 108 megapixel sensor. In addition to the main one, there is also an ultra-wide-angle 8 megapixel camera with a 5 megapixel macro and a 2 megapixel depth sensor in between. The Note 10 Pro is based on the 8nm Snapdragon 732G chipset, the same one we saw in other phones such as Poco X3 NFC, for example. Combined with 6 or 8 GB of RAM and 64 or 128 GB of UFS 2.2 storage respectively, the Redmi Note 10 Pro has hardware capable of performing some demanding tasks you might want to use the phone for. There is also Adreno 618 graphics that easily copes with demanding games, especially since this phone keeps the resolution within 1080p limits. The only area where we noticed a difference in performance is artificial intelligence, where the AI benchmark tests showed only half of the score that, for example, the Snapdragon 720G equipped with Realme 7 Pro achieved. Please keep in mind that this is also the chipset you'll find in this year's Galaxy A series, specifically the A52 and A72 models. Redmi Note 10 Pro is equipped with the non-standard size 5020 mAh battery, which easily allows for 2 days of normal use with the active dynamic refresh rate. In our YouTube video playback test, after 10 hours there was 53% of the battery remaining. With a fast 33-watt charger, which really nicely rounds out the whole battery aspect of this lower middle class phone, it takes a bit over an hour to charge the phone from 0 to 100, which is pretty much as advertised by the manufacturer. Android 11 on Redmi Note 10 Pro comes with the well-known MIUI 12 user interface. This is one of the first phones besides the Mi 11 series that comes with the latest version of the graphical user interface. Some of the new features include an iPhone-like notifications bar, which if you slide down along the left side gives you a list of notifications, and along the right side opens a new control center with shortcuts. If you're not ready for such a big change yet, there is always an option to use a classic notifications bar. Of course, there are a large number of themes available that, as always, are an important part of MIUI. And let's not forget about the infamous ads, which are displayed whenever the opportunity arises, for example during each application check, as well as boring 5 to 10 seconds wait whenever you need to confirm a significant change, which makes you feel as if you're 3.5 years old, so mom and dad have to give their permission for anything you want to do on the phone. At the beginning, we mentioned that Redmi Note 10 Pro's camera system, and during the test, we were very interested in how powerful the 108 megapixel sensor performs on the non-top-of-the-line chipset. As a reminder, Xiaomi uses a large Samsung ISOCELL HM2 Nona Bayer sensor with a 0.7 micrometer pixels, which are effectively 2.1 micrometers, and a lens with an aperture of f1.9 at 26mm focal length. The wider sensor is a Sony IMX355 with a more modest 8 megapixels f2.2 lens and a fixed focus, while the macro sensor uses a 5 megapixel OmniVision OV5675 sensor with the very useful autofocus capabilities ranging from 3 to 10 centimeters. The selfie camera has a Sony 16 megapixel sensor behind a wide-angle 20mm lens with an f2.4 and fixed focus. The camera app is a classic Xiaomi one with options arranged along the top and modes above the shutter software button. There are 0.6x and 2x photo zoom options, and macro mode is activated in the options menu in the upper left corner. All zooming above 1x is digital and goes up to 10x in fine increments. Xiaomi seems to have further complicated the camera applications by shuffling and rearranging modes, shortcuts, and additional options, which was completely unnecessary, so we hope to see some significant, more logical change in future versions of the software. The photos are delivered in 12 megapixels, 9 times lower resolution than that on the main sensor, as we are used to from this 108 megapixel sensor. They're really exceptional. The large sensor absorbs a huge amount of light and gathers plenty of detail, so the images are really good. The dynamic range is high with natural colors and good noise reduction. The use of such a good sensor in a phone of this class raises questions of the price of leading phones, because the photos that this phone takes are almost side by side with many models costing over 1,000 euros. Note that the process of merging pixels in combination with sometimes a bit excessive post-processing can produce some unwanted side effects in part of the scene with larger repetitive patterns. To avoid this, switch the camera mode to full resolution for the additional modes menu and enjoy the unreal amount of details that this sensor displays. There is no penalty for this in terms of dynamic range. Color display remains good, with only drawback being the size of the photos. Using 2x zoom looks decent considering the size of the sensor, so the images are usable in most cases, if you don't mind the obvious use of the digital crop and upscaling. However, simply cropping the images of the main sensor will give you better photos, so if you don't really want to share the photo right away, it is better to skip this mode, shoot full res, and crop afterwards. In low light conditions, the Redmi Note 10 Pro still makes good images, but the lack of optical stabilization requires a steady hand, so we advise you to always take a few photos just in case, so that you won't find later that only one image you took is too blurry. The colors in night photos are true, there is a lot of detail, but sadly also a lot of noise when the software shoots with ISO values over 5000. Night mode is also present on the main camera, and keep in mind that like on any other phone, it takes few seconds per photo. The result is a better visibility in the darkest parts of the frame, less noise, and a well-balanced image. The wide-angle lens with its 100 megapixels less than on the main sensor gives surprisingly good photos. Sharp in the middle, a little softer towards the corners with a slight warmer color display and decent dynamic range. All in all, very good alternative when you can't fit everything in the frame, although the width of this lens won't really impress you compared to the main camera. Night photos of this sensor, as expected, are to be used only when you really have no choice, because they're far inferior to the main sensor in every aspect except the frame width. Darker, blurry, and without a night mode to assist and fix the camera's limitations. The macro camera surprises us with its autofocus capabilities in the range from 3 to 10 centimeters, which is very useful when you want to experiment with macro photography. The downside is that the images often look better on the phone screen than when you transfer them to your computer, as they seem somewhat blurry and of average quality. Therefore, it is recommended to use this camera when you have enough light at your disposal and when you can keep your hand calm enough or lean on something to avoid a blurry photo. The selfie camera is also good. The resolution of 16 megapixels enables decent quality images. The colors are good, especially when it comes to the skin tone and with plenty of detail. The portrait mode does its job nicely with good separation of the subject from the background for a nice depth of field effect. Too bad there is no support for 4K selfie video with only 1080p available. 4K at 30fps and 1080p at 60fps video modes are available on the main camera and will probably see the most use. As we're used to from this Samsung sensor, the image is exceptional in the video as well, almost like making the photos into moving shots. The video has a lot of details, looks very sharp, almost noise-free, and with admirable dynamic range. If needed, there's also a good 1080p video with a wide-angle camera, which works better than we expected. Optical stabilization would sure be great on the main sensor, but it would be unrealistic to expect it at this price on this phone. How exactly did Xiaomi manage to pack a fairly strong hardware in $330 phone with an AMOLED screen at 120Hz and a 108 megapixel sensor is something only they know. I'm talking about the 64GB version, although we absolutely recommend getting a $30 more expensive version that packs double the storage memory. Competitors claim that the cost production of this phone is more than its retail price and that Xiaomi wants to make their life difficult at all costs. One thing's for sure, they do not have the arsenal needed to compete with phones like the Redmi Note 10 Pro. And why that is so, it's up for the industry to figure out. The users only have reason to be satisfied with what they're getting. And just as we were impressed by the list of specs on paper, we were amazed by the execution and the way these elements fit into one beautifully designed phone like the Xiaomi Redmi Note 10 Pro. For 280 euros, you get a screen that only found in phones whose starting price exceeds 500 euros, a camera that makes photos a touch below the quality of those best and most expensive phones of today, and solid hardware. The battery lasts about 2 days of a single charge, a charger is relatively fast, you get a stereo speaker and all modern connections, including an almost forgotten infrared port and a 3.5mm jack. And at that price, you will excuse the annoying advertisements. It seems that we already received a phone in April that will be the best-selling phone in 2021. This is simply an offer that is almost impossible to refuse. And thank you for watching another review, this time featuring the Redmi Note 10 Pro. If you enjoyed this video and you want to stay tuned for more tech reviews, consider subscribing to the Bench House YouTube channel for more videos. My name is Marco, and I will see you next time.